everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. For come rain, shine, or anything between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Bounces away.
And this is a week where I think it will be infinitely more helpful to focus on what is rather than what could have been or even what should have been. Because if you focus on what should have or could have been, you will do nothing but hurt yourself. This, I'll admit, was a very painful loss. From the first half being a complete and utter blowout to coming up just short in overtime up against a top 10 squad, fighting for your life down in Arlington. You know, you got to give credit to Texas as much as it hurts me. They played a generally pretty good game, especially on defense. And, you know, you could focus on, you know, everything that the team did wrong, which we'll certainly talk about, but I'm not one to claim moral victories, but at the same time, I walked away from this, you know, accepting the fact that Arlington probably won't be happening anymore. Although there is, according to some people, like a 20% chance of that still happening. I wouldn't hold my breath for it. But I walked away fine after this loss. I expected it to hurt a lot more than it actually did, especially with how it ended. But I found myself, I don't want to say okay with a loss, because I think that's setting yourself up for a lot of really bad things in the future. But I found myself considering everything and all the factors that came together. I don't feel as if this even is like a top 10 loss in my time as a K-State fan.
In terms of actual effect that it has on a season, it's not gonna ultimately. I mean, like it does keep us out of Arlington, but like it wasn't that it was unexpected, I guess. But it definitely hurt, especially because this was a game that we probably should have won, and we at multiple occasions elected not to. So that's what really hurts, I think, about this loss, is that we, by all measures, should have won.
Yeah, should have won the game, but again, I think that's the danger of trying to think in should-haves. And I don't even think it's the same kind of should have won that we had up against Oklahoma State. Like, this is a completely different brand of should have won this game. But, you know, just credit where it's due. The team fought when they could have rolled over and died. And, you know, there's a lot to be said about teams that refuse to say die. And, you know, my advice is to just kind of enjoy the rest of the season for what it is, wherever we end up, whatever the games do. My advice is just to, you know, enjoy the rest of the time you have with the Cats this season, because it's still a really fun team. Which I think is why we may not be as pessimistic as some other people. Because I met some people that were down atrocious after this loss. And I don't blame them. But, yeah, you want to go into game day grades, or do you have any other more general things to note?
Well, yeah, I totally get why people are really upset after this, because I mean, we went to Arlington last year and there's no reason that we shouldn't have been able to make it this year, but it feels like a lot of it has been getting in our own way, and this game exemplified that. I'm not writing off the team really for still having a successful season, maybe not relative to the expectations we had before the year, but that doesn't mean that we can't still have a good year and win out and make a quality bowl game and win that bowl game. You know, there's no reason that we can't do that. And there were still some really good individual performances in this game as well. Just a few too many errors at key points. There are multiple occasions that could have really changed this game for the better.
Yeah.
That we just weren't able to take advantage of.
Yeah. And yeah, that's what sucks, is the missed opportunities. But we're just going to go ahead and start with game day grades, where we go through every single position group, giving them a grade from F to A+. F meaning they near single-handedly lost us the game, and A+ meaning they near single-handedly won us the game. We didn't win, so no A pluses. But starting with the man under center, I mean, you and I think I told you a joke before the game started, like 2 days beforehand. It's like, man, I'm really excited for the Will Howard career game. How the monkey's paw curls, huh? Because Will had himself an amazing game. 26 of 42, 327 yards, 4 touchdowns, only 1 pick. I don't even want to count the pick because it's not on him. But, I mean, I know that you and I, and especially with some of the people we follow or that follow us on Twitter, we kind of get overrepresentative on both sides of negative and positive about the Will Howard, I suppose, discourse, and we have for the past 3 years at this point. But I think that this game, regardless of if it would have been a win and the fact that it is a loss, you cannot look at this performance, looking at what Will Howard did, and say that is not an A performance. There's no universe where this is not. And it wasn't like he was making like baby's first throws either. No, he was making legitimate like hole shot, on the run throws. Like, he was making NFL playmaker level throws. And you know, it was awesome to see that. And I'm just really happy that he had this performance. The only thing that would have made it, the only thing keeping it from being an A+ was we didn't win.
Yeah, I was pretty much the same. And there was definitely a moment where he could have scored a touchdown on either the final drive in overtime or the final drive in regulation. I can't remember. Where he had an open lane to the right if he cuts it back. Mm-hmm. But I think that I'm not going to linger on that too much because I don't think we should have been going QB run as often as we did regardless. So I'm not going to put that on Will. But yeah, this was statistically Will's best game of his career. He tied his career high in touchdowns. The one pick he had was not even a turnover-worthy throw. That was just a Keegan Johnson mess-up. And Will threw for 300 yards for the first time in his career. So that was also another moment where it's unfortunate that happens in a loss, but he did finally eclipse that number that's been evading him oddly. I mean, Will was awesome in this game. And I know there were definitely people during the game blaming him. I didn't see as much of it after the game. But during the game, there were definitely some people that were pinning a lot of what was happening on Will. Even some media members. I did see some people in media do it. But Will was pretty much the whole reason that we were in the game. So yeah. He deserves a ton of credit and a ton of love for that. So he got an A from me.
Yeah, and he got it from some of his teammates like Ben Sinnott after the game. But then you move on to the running backs. I was really tempted to just give them an incomplete grade because there's literally like nothing they could have done. I ended up giving them a D+ because DJ Giddens did well enough in the receiving game, so did Trayshawn, but they just could not get running. Like, they had a combined net of 52 yards, and trust me, we'll get into the reason why, the multiple reasons why, but I can't give them anything above like a below average like D+ performance.
Yeah, I gave them a D. It does suck because I think you're right. They really couldn't have done a whole lot else, especially early in the game. A lot of that I think does come back to the offensive line and and then play calling as well. But yeah, I mean, there just wasn't much for those guys to do really at any point in the game. I mean, DJ had like an 8-yard carry, and I think it was his first carry of the entire game that he got that. So he got he got over a third of his yardage on his very first snap. So it's just pretty unfortunate, but they just were not very good, and it's mostly of no fault of their own. So they got a D.
Yeah. Wide receivers. This is an interesting one. Phil had himself a really good game. So did Jace on the whole shot from Will was one of probably the best catch and throw of the year. Phil had himself an amazing effort play to score a touchdown. Keegan Johnson was 7 for 70, so kind of a mini Keegan Johnson breakout game. We'll get to the other part in a second. But those were the only 3 receivers who registered as stats. You want to see J-Jack get involved. However, the Keegan Johnson drop into batted into the safety interception was probably the second most consequential play of the game, right next to the missed extra point, which I don't understand why we re-kicked it when we got the extra point the first time. But that's probably the most consequential play of the game, and that itself probably knocked this down from being like a B to B plus performance to a C plus, because I do think that pick was probably the second most game-changing play in the opposite, like in K-State's detriment of the entire game.
I was a bit more generous. I gave them a B. Jace was awesome. That touchdown he had was great. Keegan pretty much doubled all of his stats on the season in this one game. And then Phil had some really nice effort plays as well. We saw a lot of effort from him. I think Keegan added a jet sweep that still didn't do anything. But this was a pretty good performance for the receivers, and they were clutch down the stretch. Can't get over the Keegan drop turn to pick. That was pretty horrible. But other than that, they were still really good. And that was 3 receivers all having good games, in my view. So I'm not going to get as hung up on getting guys like J-Jack involved. J-Jack hasn't had to catch in like 3 or 4 games at this point. If we can just have 3 guys put out those type of numbers week in, week out, I'm completely fine with that. And so I'll roll with that and be very happy. But the Keegan Johnson drop is what keeps them from getting up to an A. But they still had a pretty good day. So they get some credit for that.
Yeah. Ben Sinnott, mostly just Ben Sinnott. I just gave him a straight B because his work in the receiving game is really good. I still think it's really funny, like first play of the game, or like the first drive of the game on a 3rd down, he's getting held like into the next existence. Like he's getting his hand held to like go to a roller coaster or something. And they just, that's beautiful coverage on Ben Sinnott. Technically. But Ben Sinnott did everything that he could except for block a little better. I think that's just a B performance.
Yeah, I gave him a B as well. He was solid. We saw some Will Swanson for blocking. I don't know if we saw Garrett Oakley at all. I just don't think he would have been a great matchup, except for if we wanted to get something going receiving-wise. But, yeah, Ben Sinnott was good. He was fairly reliable. And at one point, when Avery came in, he had a throw to Ben that was not good. And Ben came in and played defense and broke up the interception. So he did good there as well. So that's a B game to me. I could have done better. Was really frustrated about the missed holding on that first drive. But other than that, he was pretty good.
Yep. All right, here's one of the 2 biggies. The offensive line. After 2 really good performances, they, I don't want to say they laid a complete egg, but you could tell from basically snap 1, they were overmatched by mostly T'Vondre Sweat. It was mostly T'Vondre Sweat, which we kind of saw coming. But it is so rare to see a single interior defensive lineman basically just drop everything on earth on the foreheads of an offensive line, and yet there's T'Vondre Sweat doing exactly that. The offensive line didn't have a good day, and they were better in the second half, but you also got to keep in mind that a big part of being better in the second half was they weren't all collectively failing at once when we had to go throw it mode, which means that Will had an angle of escape. I gave them a D+ because they could not run block to save their lives. And it wasn't even, like, they weren't even blocking the ends particularly well, which when you're not blocking ends whose only job is to pass rush on run plays, that's really, really not good.
Yeah. The offensive line, they were not particularly good in this game. I think we knew coming into it that this was going to probably be a pretty rough game for the offensive line, but they somehow did worse than we thought they would do, which just makes it even more frustrating. Will was under pressure for a ton of this game. In fact, he was under pressure on 41%, almost 42% of his dropbacks, and was only blitzed 39.6% of the time. Although when he was blitzed, he actually did really well. But when he was under pressure from a four-man rush, he was very bad. He did have a touchdown there, but the four-man rush was just destroying the offensive line throughout a lot of the game. And it was just bad. It was just really bad. Anytime we tried to run the ball, there was no push getting made, with the exception of Cooper Beebe. Was kind of getting a push, but Panzer really got picked on. I feel like in this game they were lining up Sweat on Panzer or on his right shoulder, and were sometimes having him go across face and hitting Gilly from the side, and they knew who to attack. I'll put it like that. And it was just an embarrassing performance, I think, for most of the offensive line. I would say, I think if you don't grade on a curve relative to the competition, this was absolutely their worst performance of the year. I think they've had pretty bad performances against much worse fronts earlier in the season. Obviously, this is the best front they're going to face, but just completely overmatched, out-athleted, out-strengthed. Very little redeeming to take from it, other than they, I think, did a bit better in pass pro when we were mounting that comeback. They were giving Will a little bit more time, but still, they only get a D. That's the absolute best I can do, and that's being a little generous too.
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of that was just them not all failing at once. It was at least one person holding on and giving an escape lane. Do you want to just move the coordinator up here? Because that's probably where we're going to do the bulk of the talking. Just do the offensive coordinator with the offense.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's for the best.
All right. So, first half, Colin Klein. Terrible. That, I don't feel like there's any other way to say it. I feel like at this point we have said on 3 or 4 separate occasions that was Colin Klein's worst performance, which granted, he's still a young offensive coordinator, so there's not like a really big sample size. That first half may genuinely be up there with Oklahoma State this year and Tulane last year. I don't know. Before I continue, where do you rank it, like, those 3 games? Because it's probably pressing. Oh, damn! It might be number 1.
And what were the games you listed? Tulane, Oklahoma State this year, and what was the other one?
This one.
And this one. This was probably the worst, I think. Tulane was pretty bad. Oklahoma State, I think, was bad in the moment, but not as bad as those other 2. Although I'm not sure how much of Tulane was on Adrian, honestly. But this one is, I think, without a doubt, the worst.
Yeah. So the first half was probably the worst half of Colin Klein's offensive coordinating career. And, you know, all due respect, I hope it remains the worst. Because you can't get too much worse than the first half. If it was just the first half, Klein would have gotten an F-, and we probably would have been shut out. But then the second half happened. And Colin Klein figured out, wait a minute, the defensive backs are giving us their blind spot in coverage. We could throw outside. And lo and behold, we started throwing outside and the offense started working. Connor, I told you we could do this before the game. So, little upset that it took that long to figure out. But credit where credit's due, he made the adjustment in the second half. Now, I know that people are going to get caught up on the first half and the last drive in the the overtime. The pop pass was open. It just got batted up. That sucks. The QB power play. What? And the last play, just you didn't get enough time. Though that's a very lackluster sequence that you just happen to have at the exact incorrect time. I still would have kicked the field goal, but that's just me. If you balance out the worst performance of his career with a pretty solid one in the second half, albeit with something that I predicted would have happened before the game, to me it averaged out to a C-. That being said, I'm taking the two halves as if they're two different assignments. So we've got like a B+ and an F-. Flip the order there. Connor, what are your thoughts on this?
I gave Klein a D. He was really bad to start the game and throughout the entire first half, really, with the lone exception being on our scoring drive at the very end of the half. He can't make long snaps work. He didn't make Keegan Johnson drop that ball that became an interception. But what he can do is not overcommit to the run and understand that we do actually have some advantages in the pass game against Texas, and understand that our offensive line is just overmatched by Texas for the most part. I understand wanting to try and keep a balance and try to keep the run game going, but it took him, I think, way too long to recognize that. If he had recognized that after maybe 3 drives, 4 drives, then that maybe changes things a little bit. But it took us way too long to continue to be continuously running the ball behind an offensive line that was overmatched, with running backs that just didn't have any room to work, and then running, especially early, pass plays that were taking too long to develop, and were hurting Will more than anything. So just a disaster class, especially in the first half. And the second half was definitely a lot better. That's why he doesn't get a failing grade for the game from me. But so much of the reasoning behind losing, I do think, comes back to how do I want to say this? Stubbornness offensively. We were way too stubborn offensively early in the game to win it. If we hadn't been so stubborn, and if we had not, frankly, been coaching scared, if we hadn't been play calling like we were scared, having our overall coaching feel like we're playing scared, if we hadn't done that, then this game maybe goes differently. But it took Kleiman, I think, too long to get into his riverboat Kleiman mindset that he tends to have when he's completely overmatched athletically. Like if we go back to playing Bama, and honestly the last few times we've played Texas, he definitely gets hyper aggressive in those situations where he's completely out athleted. But Klein and Kleiman, I guess, they really hid in their shells for too long. And this was a coaching loss. I mean, that's exactly what it was. I'm not going to really pin this loss on a single position group. You could on the offensive line, but that was a known factor coming into this game. We knew that their defensive front would probably, especially on the interior, completely obliterate us. And you're not going to believe this, but that's exactly what they did. So, just really, really frustrating. We should have won this game in regulation if we had made the plays we should have. The gimme plays. We were really putting ourselves in good positions. We were coaching ourselves to being in a good spot, and then completely blowing all the progress that we made. But Klein, play calling wasn't great. He adjusted and got aggressive late in the game, and we started scoring. And we just seemed to forget that we were the team with the red zone scoring advantage by the end. So we had Klein gets a D. We don't grade Kleiman, but I would probably give him an F because I think he's the reason we lost. But
yeah, I keep going back to the accepting the penalty and then kicking the extra point anyway after you made it the first time.
Yeah, that was there. I think there were several things that going for it on fourth, I don't think was a good idea.
I get why you do it though.
Yeah, but we have an advantage in that area though. Texas had not done anything against our defense in the red zone.
Nope.
We were shutting them down in the red zone, and we knew that Texas was not a good red zone team. And we elected to not go that direction, which I get. You're worried about how athletic they are. But Texas has not shown the ability to play competent football in the red zone. Not just in this game, but all season. That's just not something they've been able to do. Malik Murphy was, after his scripted drives got done, not very good.
He was awful.
Yeah, he was really, really bad after he was out of script. So why not continue forcing his hand there? Why not do that? And defensively, you did better than I thought they would do against Jonathan Brooks, especially once we got later in the game. But just, man, and there's other little things that we can get to, like VJ dropping the interception in the end zone. That should have been a pick with a touchback for K-State, and it turned into 3 points for Texas. The extra point, of course. The missed field goal, of course.
Duffy getting assassinated by Ethan Burke.
Yeah. There's a lot of things, a lot of little things that prevented K-State from really achieving its full potential in this game. And that's what makes this loss frustrating, is not that you came into this expecting like a dominant victory or anything, but that we showed on the field that we could keep pace with a really good Texas team, and genuinely had a chance to win in not fluky fashion, and we blew it.
Yep. But now we can move on to the defense, which I know they gave up 33 points, but it could have been worse. That's sort of how I think about it. The defensive line, it's the first group we grade. I was whelmed with them. I wasn't like overwhelmed. I wasn't, ridiculously happy. I was whelmed. I thought they were fine. According to PFF, they got pressure on 18.4% of the dropbacks, which is fine. It's a little below average, but this is a solid offensive line who, just don't give up a lot of stuff when you're rushing 3. But I gave them a B. I thought they did well enough in their run assignments. Uso almost killed someone because he picks 1 or 2 plays a game where he just spawns where he shouldn't be to make a tackle. Brendan Mott had some really consequential pass breakups or batted balls at the line. I just really wish that we got to Malik Murphy more in terms of sacks, because he's not someone who can move. So you want to get those opportunities when you can. I just gave them a flat B.
I also gave them a B. They did better than I thought that they would do against a really, really good offensive line for Texas. Especially in the run game. Yeah, Brooks got some big runs. That wasn't surprising. They still had some plays where they stuffed him. The big issue was pressure. Malik Murphy was only pressured on like 18% of his dropbacks. And so out of 38 dropbacks, he was only pressured 7 times. And when he was pressured, he was considerably worse when he was doing already poorly. So the fact that we could not get pressure, really whether we were blitzing or not blitzing, it didn't matter if we blitzed or not. We just weren't getting pressure. And it was pretty embarrassing, honestly, for the pass rush, I think. We just couldn't get anything done, no matter what we tried. It was pretty much just pure luck of the draw if we were going to actually get pressure or not. So They still get a B because their run defense was pretty decent. Uso had some big plays as well, like you mentioned. But, yeah. Could have been a lot better. Really disappointed with the amount of pressure.
Yeah. Linebackers, this one I thought they had a better day than the defensive line just by virtue of they were constantly in the right position. I'm thinking of the one Austin Moore playing coverage where he's just a hair late, where Jatavian Sanders just sits down right behind him. That one really hurt on like a third down. But outside of that, I'm not thinking of any like glaring plays where they looked out of place. Of course, there were a few times where they got blocked, and sometimes whenever you had like 230, how much does Jay Clifton weigh?
Around there, 220, 230.
Whenever you get 220, 230 Jake Clifton meeting a 330-pound Texas guard, I don't think that's a winning formula. But I walked away fine with their performance. All in all, I was fine with the defense's performance, especially outside of the scripted drives. Because a lot of times it felt like they were giving up plays. It kind of felt like, well, yeah, he just kind of got beat, which there's not much that you can do about that. Or, oh, well, we guessed wrong. That sucks. But I gave the linebackers a B+.
I gave him a B, similar to the defensive line. One thing I didn't mention about the D-line was Brendan Mott blocked 2 passes with his face. And so he does deserve some credit for that.
He's
not even as a joke. Yeah, it was pretty good. But, yeah, the linebackers were pretty decent. Des Purnell, he was in the right place a lot. Just wasn't quite able to finish the play all the time. He did a really good job of filling RPO gaps and would get his hands up and just wasn't quite able to get his hands in the right spot. Clifton was good, too. There were a few times where the run fill was not very good from whoever the linebacker was. I think Austin Moore might have missed one. Romaine, I think he didn't play a ton, but he did miss a couple. But it was fine. It was a fine day for the linebackers. This was not as bad of a day as I was fearing they may have. I think starting Clifton was a very good idea compared to Romaine. I think in a perfect world you'd start Romaine from a size perspective at Mike. But he just, I don't think is quite there yet. If this game happened next year, I'd want Romaine starting probably, just because I think he matches up better with some of the interior guys, because he's got like 25 pounds on Clifton, I think. So that would have helped. But they were still pretty decent, all things considered. So they get a B.
Yeah. Defensive backs, talk about an up and down performance. I know that they gave up 248 yards, and I know that Malik Murphy wasn't very good. But I want you to think of this in terms of scripted drives and non-scripted drives. In the scripted drives is where the big play to Adonai Mitchell came in. I'm not going to call him AD. I'm going to keep calling him Adonai just because I'm contrarian. But
okay.
I know no one cares. But yeah, Parrish gets bit on a double move, and he gets beat by Adonai Mitchell twice. Outside of that, we limited Xavier Worthy to under 50 yards, and no other receiver got over 100 yards. And a lot of those were big plays to Adonai Mitchell. Plus, we got 2 picks. Probably should have been 3, maybe even 4. But no, I'm not putting this game on the defensive backs. Because they did as well a job as I thought they would at preventing explosive plays. Plus, you had Will Lee force another big fumble just by sticking his nose right into the run fit, which, first off, he may be better at that than Julius Brents was. And Julius kind of became known his senior year for just being willing. He was taking on Bama's guards and not losing last year, and Will Lee may be better at it. But I was fine with the defensive backs' performance. I don't think they did that poorly. I ended up giving them a B+ too.
Yeah, I actually gave them an A. I was really happy with how they performed, especially Jacob Parrish. He got 2 picks, which was massive. Jacob Parrish was one of the most impressive players to me of the day because he was really just getting picked on to begin the game, and he really came back with a vengeance and finished off with what was a really, really bad start and ended up being one of the premier defensive players of the day. Getting 2 picks, adding another pass breakup, and generally playing pretty well. He was good. He was really good. He had 6 tackles too. But yeah, he got picked on pretty bad to start. With the touchdown to Mitchell, he was burnt at least once and had to get a DPI to avoid the touchdown. It was a rough game at times for him, but other than him, Keaton Garber, I remember he had a pass breakup at one point. I think he did.
He did.
So that was pretty decent. Will Lee had a really nice pass breakup over the middle, and he led the team in tackles as well with 9. Then you mentioned the forced fumble. He's been really, really effective this year just as a havoc creator. I don't have havoc rate stats in front of me, but whenever KSU fan posts them, I'm sure Will Lee is going to have a really, really effective havoc rate. Siegel was fairly decent, I thought, as was Savage. VJ Payne should have had a pick, but dropped it. In the grand scheme, that you can't pin the game on that, although I guess if you looked at it on purely numbers, it technically would have changed everything, but it was in like the second quarter. So like that's not something you're taking into account right there. But all in all, it was, despite a rough start, an overall pretty good day for the defensive backs.
Yep. Kleinerman, this is another one. Once they got outside of their scripted drives and the one fluky little pitch play where they thought they were going to do the tush push and they just flicked it to the outside, I thought Kleiner had a good day. I mean, especially given I love this team to death, but the talent gap, which is quite large, I thought he did really well considering the circumstances. You know, you thought I wish he brought the overload look a bit more. That's my biggest complaint. Was I really wish that he brought the overlook, the overload blitzes. Yeah, thank you. The overload blitzes a lot more because they were good against Houston, and I think they would have been really good against Texas because I don't think they would have slid very, very well. But I ended up giving him a B+. I know he gave up 33 points. Yeah, but how many of those were scripted? How many of those were a fumble happening because a right tackle gets blasted on like the 3-yard line? How much of that is a missed interception? How much of that is, you just start going through this and you're like, okay, well, if you're looking at purely where Texas started, I'm pretty sure if they started like before their 40-yard line, their chances of scoring weren't very good. So I gave him a B+.
Yeah, I gave him a B+ as well. I wanted to give him an A- because I do think that the defense played better than I thought they would. I couldn't quite do it because while the defensive backs played well and the run defense was decent enough with the exception of a couple of explosive plays, I was really disappointed still with the lack of creativity in creating pressure. Could have been a lot better there. And you mentioned could have done a lot more than overload. So I was a bit disappointed to see that kind of be lacking. But it was still a pretty solid day for Kleinerman, so I give him a B+. I could have been better, but it was pretty good.
Yep. Now we get to talk about MVPs. I feel like there are 2 really obvious choices, and it's just Will Howard and Will Lee.
Yeah, I think it's Will Howard for offense for sure. You can make an argument for Parrish, I think, defensively with 2 picks and another pass breakup. I'll go with Will Lee, though, just because of the forced fumble, leading the team in tackles, having a fantastic pass breakup over the middle. But yeah, Will Howard's the obvious one on offense. He was the whole reason we were even in the game in the first place. He was good enough that we really didn't see much Avery Johnson. Frankly, we shouldn't have seen him at all, I think, because the bits that he did play, he didn't really do anything that Will couldn't have done. He had one run that didn't do anything, a couple handoffs that didn't do anything. So just wasn't much reason to ever take Will out, I think. But Will was awesome.
Yeah. I don't... Well, I'm going to see it anyway, but I'm going to say it nevertheless. I really don't want to see any more Avery should be the guy talk. I don't want to see that anymore. Because I never really... Well, that's not true. I'm not going to play revisionist historian. there was a time where I was like, yeah, you know what, Avery probably should be involved a little bit more, arguing on being the guy. Credit to you for being the less reactionary of the two of us. But yeah, I think that book has been thoroughly shut. I think Will proved that he should be the guy for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I completely agree. It should be Will. There's at least 4 more games to be played, so I think Will should probably be the starter for all of those games, but I mean, we'll just have to wait and see. I'm not really sure. I'm sure we'll still see some Avery Johnson, but yeah, Will was phenomenal against Texas, so he deserves to be the starter.
Yeah, absolutely. I pretty much just want to put this game to rest. I think it's unlikely that Arlington happens. It's still technically possible, but I like I said in the very beginning of the episode, just enjoy the rest of the season for what it is, because it's still a really, really fun team that has a chance to go to a pretty good bowl game. I think probably slated somewhere in the Alamo Bowl range.
That's, I think, where we're at right now, yeah.
If we go to the Liberty Bowl, we're canceling the pod. But we'll let you determine whether that's serious or not. But yeah, the next game is up at home. 2 p.m. kick, I do believe, up against a pretty bad Baylor team that's going for bowl eligibility. We'll give you the preview for that later this week. But to show our hands a little bit here, Baylor doesn't have an identity. Baylor doesn't know what Baylor wants to be.
Yeah, and how much would it really matter if they knew what they wanted to be, I guess, because they're not very good, which I think their fall off has been one of the more surprising developments of the last couple of years for Big 12 football, because I mean, they won a Big 12 title just 2 seasons ago,
yep.
And they're now at the point where they may fire their coach. So if for the people that I have seen saying that we should fire Kleiman and the entire staff, Baylor could be like, Baylor is the bad version of like what could happen to a team that wins the Big 12, and we are not that.
Nope. We
are not that in a million years. So let's be grateful for that, because things could be a lot worse than being 6-3 with 3 games to go and fighting for a still chance at a double-digit win season. So
count your blessings.
Yeah.
But do you have any final thoughts?
This one hurt really bad when we first lost. But I think I got over this one the fastest out of any of our losses this year. Not sure why, but I'm glad we're past it. I'm glad that we're going to get to be very angry against a not good Baylor team. Next week should be a very fun one, I hope.
Yeah, I was about to say, if you were about to say like you got it over the quickest, I was about to correct you, like, because 2 years ago Oklahoma State, we got over that when the game was happening.
I'm talking about this season.
Yeah, you said this season. Yeah. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. If you want to email the show, we're aggievillealleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I'm at ACEdward00.
I'm at Connor Baltazar, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alleycats merch store, link in our Twitter and podcast bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast, where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.